What's going on? My name is Anthony Johnson. I'm a real estate agent in Miami, and today we're going to talk about selling a condo when it's tenant occupied. I do want to give a quick disclosure out that I am going to be posting videos that are more like podcast formatted, which means like less editing. I do want to get my content out, and I've been finding that if I have to edit, then the content is going to either not come out or it's going to come out way too late. So please forgive me if this is not perfect, but I want to get this content out. And this is something that I've been trying to, I've been trying to get out of my comfort zone and do videos. So I want to get this stuff out. So let's jump into it. And if you like this, subscribe it, like it, subscribe if you find this video or any of my videos valuable. So let's jump right into it. I am referring to the blog that I just wrote in regards to this matter. So I will be looking at my screen. So let's get into it. The first thing that you want to do is you want to gather your lease agreement. That's the first thing that I recommend that you do. You want to make sure you understand the terms of the lease that you sign with your tenant. And you want to see if there's any clauses or if there's any addendums that was signed stating that the tenant has to move out in the case of a sale. In most cases, the lease is going to be enforced after the sale. So that means if a buyer buys a property with a tenant in place, that they have to honor the lease that was already, set up before they even purchased the property. So you want to make sure you have your lease. You're also going to have to give that lease to the buyer. You may have to give that lease, at least according to the purchase and sales contract by the Florida realtors. You're going to have to, give the buyer a copy of that lease, and that buyer will have a specific amount of days to back out if they don't like the terms of that lease. So that's the first thing that you're going to want to do when you're selling your condo with a tenant in place. You want to make sure you have a lease. Now, if you don't have a lease, you might be able to just, you might have a mess on your hands, to be honest. But it might be easier if you have a good relationship with your tenant. You can get them out, but you should have a lease in place. You should never rent and not have a lease in place. The next thing that you want to do is you want to notify the tenant of the intent to sell. You want to make sure, first and foremost, that you have a good relationship with your tenant if you're looking to sell, or regardless. You want to make sure you have a good rapport with your tenant. But you want to make sure everything is good going into selling, because your tenant is going to be your greatest ally, because they are providing access to the condo. Now, the way that you want to notify them, you may want to shoot them a text, you may want to give them a call, but the best way to do it is to send them a letter via mail and a copy of the letter via email, and make sure that they received it by just asking them to confirm that they received it. If you're sending it via mail, you want to make sure you send it certified mail. So a couple of the things that you want to include in the letter is you just want to make sure you have the reason for the letter. You want to make sure you have formal language, pretty much professional language. You don't want to sound like a lawyer, but you want to make sure that everything's, typed out right. You proofread it before you send it out. You want to make sure you have give them options to vacate. So if they want to vacate, give them a specific amount of days, whether it's before or after the closing, if they want to, vacate. And you want to establish expectations. This is a big one, because you want to make sure that the tenant is aware that they are going to be expected to allow showings of the unit. You want to say how many days that you plan on showing the unit. You want to make sure they know that they need to keep the property clean, so on and so forth. And one of the biggest things is to ask them, specific times and dates. You want to make sure, if you can, if the tenant works from Monday to Friday, maybe they are okay with you showing their property during that time frame when they're gone. Maybe they don't want you to show their property when they're gone. Maybe they want to be there. So you want to make sure you communicate with them and, come to an agreement on specific days and times. That's typically best, instead of just random dates and times. And when you list it, your agent or yourself can, have those set days and times on the listing so potential buyers can see. And the other thing is you want to give, you might want to give some type of incentive, whether it's, they can end the lease and get money back, or you want to buy them out of their lease. Whatever you can think of, you can give them some type of incentive to either move out or to, show the property. So those are the few things that you can do when you're looking to notify your tenant that you're getting ready to sell. Now, if you're listing with a real estate agent, you want to make sure you introduce your real estate agent with your tenant after the first two things. You don't want to just say, hire a real estate agent and say, hey, here's my real estate agent, I'm getting ready to sell. That's not going to go well with the tenant, where it's just like out of nowhere, here's this real estate agent telling me I have to show the property. Make sure you communicate with the tenant before you throw a real estate agent in their face. Now, when you introduce the two, this is another very important point in the process, because you want your agent, and your tenant to all, work together. You want it to be a partnership. Now, when you hire an agent, they're typically just going to handle the showings. You typically won't have anything to do with it. So you want the real estate agent to be able to communicate with the tenant and for them to have a good rapport. So you want to make sure your agent is professional and is going to comply with the tenant. You don't want them to be mean or, just be rude to the tenants. You don't want that. And you also don't want the tenant to be rude to your agent. A few things that you want to do is, at least from my recommendation, is you want to try to come up with a plan. Whether it's the showings or who's going to show, maybe your tenant can show. Sometimes tenants can open up the door and show the property and the agent doesn't have to be there, but there's a buyer's agent. You want to make sure that there's some type of professional there, but maybe you can work out some type of term where they can show it sometimes, the agent can show it. Whatever the case may be, you guys should get into a group chat and have a discussion, or meet up and have some type of discussion about how, you're going to go through the process of selling your condo. What I like to do is I like to communicate with the tenant and ask the tenant to, just make sure that the unit is very, very clean and organized for when I take photos, when I create my 3D tour and I do my videos. Just so that if the tenant, has a bad day and they couldn't clean for a showing, I can always refer back to the photos that we took, the 3D tour, and say, hey, this is how the unit typically looks when it's clean. You don't want to hire a real estate agent that's just going to, excuse my language, half-ass and post bad pictures of a dirty apartment. And, and one of the biggest things is it should always have a 3D tour, but especially should have a 3D tour when there's a tenant in place, because the property or the condo might not be accessible to show as frequently as it would be if it was vacant. So you want to make sure that the agent is using a 3D tour or at least video. If the tenant isn't complying, things can get tricky. This is why, it's very important that you and your tenant has a good relationship, because your tenant technically they can't, refuse to allow you to show the property. But if they do that, you'll have to take, some legal actions. And most landlords don't want to take legal action because it costs money. It can become a headache. So if they aren't complying, try to talk to them, try to give them the incentives. And if they're not budging, if they're giving you and your real estate agent a hard time, you might just want to take it off the market, or, wait to list the property after they move out, because it's just not worth the headache. You don't want the tenant leave your property a mess. You just don't want any issues when it comes to, with your tenant, not showing the property when you're trying to sell. You don't want to deal with that. The other thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that the property is in good condition. You want to make sure you do an inspection. Go and check out the property before you list it. You might even want to have a pre-listing condo inspection to make sure everything's working well. If there's any repairs that need to be done, you should have those repairs done regardless, because you are the landlord. You want to make sure any major repairs are done. But you want to make sure that the property is clean, that the tenant is taking good care of it. And, you want to see for yourself. So, or if you have your real estate agent, have them come and send you some video, or have the tenant send you video of the property. But you should definitely go in if you are in the States or if you are in Miami, and check out the property yourself. Coordinating the showings with your tenant, again, just communicate with them. I think that you should, set up and have a specific days or specific times where it's like, okay, we do showings on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 2 to 4, just so that the tenant knows because tenants have their own lives. You don't want to just be popping up with showings for them. Like, you want them to know on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I have to allow showings from 2 to 4, or whatever the case may be. I think that that's the best way to go. You want to ask the tenant if they want to show the property. Like I said earlier, if they might be willing to show it for you, and ensure that the tenant is going to show the unit or present it in a good way. You want to make sure that they're willing to make sure that the property is at least somewhat clean. You don't want buyers to be coming to the property and it's a mess. And if they're just continually doing that, you might want to have a conversation with your tenant to make sure that they're going to make sure your property is presentable when they're showing it, or when your agent is showing it. Tenants typically think that when it goes under contracts, like, yes, I don't have to show the property anymore. But that's not the case. You're still going to have to show the property, or not show, give access to the condo inspector, the appraiser, and then there's going to be a final walkthrough. And there might be even more inspections in between all those. So you want to make sure that the tenant is, especially with the inspection. When the inspector comes in, they're probably going to come in with the buyer, with the agents, and they're going to need access to every place in the condo. And you want to make sure that the tenant is there and is willing to give that access. They can't have things blocked off. One of the biggest things is that the AC needs to be able to be accessed so that they can inspect it. But if they can't inspect it, they will put that in the report that they were unable to inspect it, and that can be an issue with the buyer. So you want to make sure that they're willing and they understand. Your agent or you might have to explain to them that even after the property is under contract, that they're still going to have to give access to the property. Your obligation to the buyer. First off, if you're using, in most cases, if you're hiring a real estate agent, you're typically going to use the as-is purchase and sales agreement. And that has, specific things in it. And there's going to be two things you can check off. One is going to be if there is a tenant in place. You have to check off saying that there's going to be a tenant in place post-sale. And the other one is to, you're going to be delivering the unit with no one occupying the unit. So you'll have to check off one of the two. And it also is going to state to disclose any facts or the terms of the lease. Again, you're going to give them the lease in the beginning. I say give the lease to your agent so that the agent can give the lease as soon as you guys go into contract, so that the buyer can review. I don't know if I mentioned this, but when you give the buyer the copy of the lease, they have a specific amount of days where they can review it and they can step back if they don't like the terms of the contract. So that's one thing that you want to keep in mind as well. Another thing that is going to be needed is that there's going to have to be an estoppel signed by the tenant, pretty much just verifying that they live, they rent, they have a lease agreement, and the terms of that lease is in place. So those are pretty much your obligations to the buyer. Now, when it comes to advance rent and security deposits, you're going to have to submit that over to, or transfer that over to the buyer at closing. If you have a property manager, you want to make sure you reach out to your property manager and put them in touch with the title company, or have them transfer the funds to you so you can transfer the funds. Whatever the case may be, the funds have to be transferred over to the buyer at closing. But that's my overview in regards to selling a condo when it's tenant occupied. If you have any feedback, please submit it in the comments. And if you like this video, make sure you like and subscribe. And I will see you guys in the next video.